Welcome back. In the previous step, we saw that when we start typing code, IDE would automatically suggest things. We can probably, if you want to call print multiplication table, you'd be able to see the name of the method. It would show what are the parameters that needs to be passed to it, and that makes it easy to write code. In this step, we will explore one more important feature of IDEs. This is called debugging. With the debugging capabilities of the IDEs, you'd be able to run through code step by step. Let's do that and see what happens in this specific step. One of the things you need to do is add something called a breakpoint. Let's do that in here. So all that you need to do is click in here. So just click right beside the 5. So we would want to stop the execution of the code at print multiplication table. So we would want to add a breakpoint. So just click there and you'd see the red thing highlighted in here, right? So that's basically what is called a breakpoint. And once you add in a breakpoint by clicking in here, what you can do is do a right click and say debug multiplication table. You can see the shortcut right here for your specific operating system. Right click debug. Once you start debugging, you'd see that a new window comes up at the bottom. This tool window is called debug. We'll explore that in detail a little later. For now, let's focus on debugging this stuff. So what you'd see is this line is now highlighted in blue. What that means is this is the current line of execution. So what is happening in here is the script is executing. We are currently at line 5 and we are invoking the print multiplication table method. What we'll do in here is something called step into. We would want to execute the print multiplication table step by step. So what we need to do is we would need to do a step into. So just click the thing in here. You can also do a step into by going into run and choosing step into in here. What we'll do is we'll use it from the debug window. So I'll do a step into. And you can see once I do a step into that the parameters are passed. So you can see the values of all the variables in here. You can see the variables which are present right now are table which has a value of 5, start which has a value of 1 and end which has a value of 10. And you can see that the line that is currently next for execution is for I in range start to end plus 1. Let's now do a step over. The way you can do a step over is by this thing over here. If you do a step over, what would happen is this entire line would be executed and we would move execution to the next line. So step over, and now you'd see that there is a new variable present. There's a variable called I. I has a value of 1 right now. And let's do a step over again. And what happens now is the print statement is executed. Once the print statement is executed, the control goes back to the for loop. If you go to the console, you would see that this is printed. 5 into 1 is equal to 5. Let's go back to the debugger and let's run this line of code, the for. So let's do a step over and you'd see that now the value of I becomes 2. And if you do a step over again, you would see in the console that 5 into 2 is equal to 10 is printed. So basically what we are doing in here is called debugging. We are executing the program step by step. This is very useful in understanding how things work. So if we are doing something and you're not able to understand what's happening, then you can use this debug mode to be able to look at code in depth. You can see what are the variables, how the code is executing. I think debugging is an awesome learning tool and I would recommend you to use it as frequently as you can. You can either continue execution step by using step over, or you can say step out. And this would complete the execution of the method and take the control back to the script. And after that, if you do a step out again, the entire program completes execution. So if you go to the console, you would see all the things that are printed inside the output. Let's now look at what is the difference between step over, step into, and step out in detail. What I'll do is I'll make the same call 5 times. So I'll have different tables executed 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we are calling the print multiplication table again and again inside our program right now. Let's now try and debug it. Right click, debug. So what would happen when I do a step into is we will go into the code of the print multiplication table. So right now the execution is at this line. So if I do a step into, then what would happen is we would start debugging the code inside the print multiplication table. On the other hand, if I do a step over, what would happen is we would complete the execution of the entire line and move into the next line. We would not really go into this specific method, into the details of that specific method. Let's start with doing a step over. So I'm doing a step over right now, F8. You'd see that the entire thing is executed and the execution now shifts to the next line. So we are ready to execute line number 6. The entire method with call which happens from print multiplication table is now complete. If you go to console, you'd see that the entire 5 table is printed. However, now if I do a step into F7, what would happen? We are going inside the code. Now if you see the variables, you can see that we are now executing this call. So we are executing the call print multiplication table 6, 1, 10, and that's the variables that you'd see in here. The other thing you can also see in here is the call trace. You can see that we are executing multiplication table line number 2, and if you go here, click here, it would show the exact call that is being executed. So it's showing, okay, we are executing this specific call 6, 1, 10, and we are executing at this specific line right now. Now, if we want to complete the execution of this method completely and get out, so I would want to make sure that the entire method is executed and we want to get out. In that kind of situation, I would use a step out. And if you do a step out, it would complete execution of the current method and it would step out. And now I would do a step over, 7 table is printed, step over, 8 table is printed, and I would do a step over again, the 9 table is printed and the program finishes execution. So basically, step over, it would completely execute the current line and move on to the next line. Step into, if there is a method call on the current line, then we would start debugging the internals of that specific method. The control shifts to the first line of that specific method. Step out is basically, if your execution is in a specific method, what happens is that complete method execution is completed and we would move on to the next line. If you try and play around with these, you'd be able to understand that very, very easily. From now on, if you don't really understand any concept, I would recommend you to try and debug it and try and make sure that you understand it before you move on to other stuff. Debug mode is very, very useful as a learning tool. I'll see you in the next step. Until then, bye-bye.